So good evening, all of you who are joining us this webinar in our series Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare. My name is Jonathan King, and I'm co-chair with Rosemary Keene of Mass Peace Action. Now, in the midst of this terrible COVID-19 pandemic, many have asked, how come in the richest and most technologically advanced nation on earth, we didn't have enough masks, not enough ventilators, not enough gowns, not enough personal protective equipment, or hospital beds, or vaccines, or drugs in the pipeline to respond to the pandemic. Now, in Mass Peace Action, our analysis was that one of the major reasons has been the systematic diversion of the nation's wealth. More than half of the congressional discretionary budget each year for many years being poured into ever more expensive foreign wars, ever more expensive and deadly weapon systems, such as more Trident nuclear submarines, more bombers, new intercontinental ballistic missiles. Of course, this is not known by the taxpayers since this is not reported back to them. Now, during the onset of the pandemic, we discovered how siloed our constituencies were. None of the organizations on the front line of providing care, and most in need of these resources, made mention of the diversion of that half their income taxes, half their members' income taxes, was going to finance the machinery of war. On the other hand, our politically engaged peace action constituency seemed relatively insensitive to the overwhelming pressures on healthcare providers, such as nurses, personal care attendants, public health personnel. So this Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare campaign was an effort to open up lines of communication and cooperation. We focused mainly on the coupling of the federal with the state budgets and the subsequent underfunding of healthcare, public health, biomedical research. So our call has been for vaccines, not submarines, nurses, not nukes. This evening, we're going to focus on those Mass Nurses Association at Saint Vincent Hospital on strike and trying to broaden and deepen their support. Now, a key step forward in this work was when Sandy Eaton joined the committee. Sandy has spent nearly 50 years working at the bedside from orderly at Boston City Hospital in 1963 to registered nurse at Quincy Medical Center until retirement in 2012. On behalf of the Mass Nurses Association, he helped organize its first rally for patient safety in June 1993 on the steps of the State House. A founding member of Mass-Care, the Massachusetts Campaign for Single Payer Healthcare, in 1995. Since then, he has been instrumental in forging relationships with the Mass Nurse Association and other healthcare groups. So Sandy is going to introduce our panelists and lead our effort to support the St. Vincent nurses. Sandy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I'm sort of very pleased and honored to be introducing this eminent panel. I've worked with each member of that panel for decades, and in terms of fighting for healthcare and social justice and labor rights. So I'd like to ask Cole to open with a brief video to introduce us to the depth of the struggle in Worcester right now.
To the St. Vincent nurses for what they are about to do. We are striking tomorrow because too many patients are falling. Too many are suffering bed sores. Too many are waiting too long for needed medications and other treatments. And too many of our nurses are choosing to leave this hospital, to leave the bedside, because they can no longer stand putting their patients in these untenable situations.
We will go back into the building, all of us, each and every one of us, when justice is served, when nurses feel that they can provide the appropriate care, when we have additional staffing that satisfies us, and we know that we can give patients the care that they deserve. And we will not be in that building unless that is going to happen.
We love our nurses here in the city of Worcester. We're with you. You make Worcester a special place. You care about your patients. You care about patient safety.
What's more important, the people who are the caregivers or the bean counters? I say it's the caregivers, the people who are doing the work on the front line. We need safe numbers of nurses at the bedside, every shift, every floor.
No more fat cats. No more. No more. Now.
Thank you, Saint Vincent nurses, for taking on a corporate giant like Tenet to help protect my community, your patients, and our practice. I'll see you on the line tomorrow.
I have a motto. It's always better to ask for forgiveness than permission. We'll be here one day longer, one day stronger. Let's go.
Know that the Worcester community is with you 110%. And when we fight, we win! When we fight, we win! It's happening now! It's happening now!
I think that sort of puts us, helps our focus, and it also helps me in terms of introducing at least two of our three panelists today. Maybe Ritacco, I first met on the picket line in the year 2000. The nuns sold Saint Vincent Hospital, a venerable old community hospital in the city of Worcester, to Orenda, a for-profit outfit that was in the process of merging with others to create Tenet Corporation, one of the largest healthcare corporations in the country, therefore one of the most powerful healthcare corporations in the world, because nobody else does healthcare like this country. She went through the strike. She emerged as a leader, and today she is among the most articulate, together with the co-chairs of that bargaining unit. And I'm pleased to say that she's the vice president of the Massachusetts Nurses Association right now. Our second speaker is Katie Murphy. I've known Katie for just about as long. I think when we first met, she was chair of the Board of Select People in the town of Framingham. Lots happened since then, but she did her job so well in terms of fighting for the rights of working families, especially immigrants, that the right wing had to deal with her. And she's been on the active in the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and I've worked with her on the board of Massachusetts campaign for single-payer healthcare, Mass-Care, and certainly on the board of the Massachusetts Nurses Association for many years. And last year she was elected president of the Massachusetts Nurses Association. Peter Knowlton, and I also go back decades in terms of fight after fight around healthcare justice, labor rights, peace, and progress for our communities. Peter has negotiated probably hundreds of contracts, and most of them, sad to say, healthcare became a central and sticking issue. And he's developed, together with the other folks in the United Electrical Workers Union, some experience in how to deal with employers, and he's going to share that with us. He had risen to be the Northeast Regional President of the United Electrical Workers, and recently he retired as the General President of the United Electrical Workers Union. And we're so happy and lucky to have him as a resident in Massachusetts, southeastern Massachusetts, and he carries on the fight for healthcare, justice, human rights, and as an educator and ongoing organizer. There's no such thing as retirement, right, Peter? I'd like to call on Marie right now to tell us what the heck's going on. Where are we at?
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me on this webinar tonight and for any efforts you choose to make to support our strike and our cause. I currently serve as the Vice President of the M&A, but more importantly for this discussion, I am a proud nurse at Saint Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, who has worked at that facility for more than 37 years. As a member on the Nurses Negotiating Committee, I have the honor of representing the amazing 700 plus nurses who, as of today, have been on strike for 169 days against Dallas-based Tenet Healthcare, a for-profit Fortune 100 company who has shown no concern for our patients or our community, save for what they can extract from them to boost their profit margin and increase value for their shareholders. This is currently the longest nurses strike nationally in more than 15 years. And if it lasts through the end of August, it will become the longest nurses strike in our state's history. This is a strike that began on March 8th over a single issue, the need for safer staffing to ensure safe patient care. In the face of unbridled corporate greed, the deliberate neglect of patients' needs, and total disrespect for those who care for patients, we put everything on the line for the patients and community we have been so proud to serve for so many years. Put simply, we are striking because the conditions at Saint Vincent Hospital every day on every shift were dangerous for patients and for those of us who care for patients. We are striking because too many patients were falling, too many were suffering bed sores, too many were waiting too long for needed medications and other treatments, and too many of our nurses were choosing to leave this hospital because they could no longer stand putting their patients in these untenable situations. It is important to understand that this strike was more than 2 years in the making, where we had made every effort to convince Tenet Healthcare to address the dangerous conditions at our hospital and to provide us with the staffing and resources we needed to keep our patients safe. The situation was only made worse during the worst public health crisis in the history of our nation, when Tenet forced nurses to care for COVID patients without the needed staff and resources, with inadequate personal protective equipment, placing our lives and our families in jeopardy, and ultimately exposing hundreds of our nurses to infection with the deadly virus. So let us all be clear, the nurses are on strike because Tenet wanted us to strike. To date, based on their own cost estimates, Tenet has spent more than $110 million to force and prolong this strike to avoid heeding our call for safer staffing levels and staffing practices for all our patients in the hospital, when a fraction of that spending would have allowed Tenet to address our concerns and ensure the care our patients deserve. The obscenity of Tenet's behavior is well documented when in April of 2020, Tenet's corporate leaders in Dallas touted their plan to use furloughs and hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars from the federal stimulus package. And this is a direct quote from their CEO, to ensure we were focused on maximizing our cash position. And it worked. In fact, Tenet has received more than $2.6 billion in taxpayer-supported funding from the federal government as part of the CARES Act. Last month, Tenet reported profits of more than $120 million for the second quarter of 2021, after posting a profit of $97 million during the first quarter, for a total profit for the year of more than $217 million since the strike began. It is clear there is no level too low for this corporation and their local so-called leader, Carolyn Jackson. There is no limits to how far they will go to intimidate our nurses and to threaten the safety of the community they are here to serve. 2 weeks ago, they announced plans to scale back services and close beds, placing the residents of Worcester's, placing their lives in jeopardy, simply to prolong this strike and maintain their dangerous staffing practices. Fortunately, over the course of this struggle, little by slow, our strike has moved Tenet at the table to a point where last Thursday, we thought we had achieved the staffing improvements the nurses need to end the strike and re-enter the hospital to provide care to their community in the face of an emerging new surge of COVID-19, driven by the Delta variant. Unfortunately, the agreement was scuttled by Tenet as Tenet ceased negotiations on Thursday after refusing to guarantee Saint Vincent nurses with years of experience, 20 to 40 years of experience at the hospital, to return to work in their previous positions. This in a callous effort to retaliate against the nurses for standing up for their patients and their community. Our members have been clear. They are ready to end the strike and provide care. But there was no way they would end the strike unless all nurses go back whole and that no nurse would lose their job because a for-profit corporation decided to retaliate against nurses for exercising their legal right to advocate for safer conditions for their patients and colleagues. This was a callous demand in the 11th hour by our CEO in blatant retaliation against the nurses with only one goal: to punish the nurses for our strike, to break our union, and thereby silence our voice as advocates for our patients and our community. The nurses of Saint Vincent Hospital are committed to our cause and will continue the strike for our patients and our community for as long as it takes, because what is at stake in this situation is the ability of nurses to advocate for and to care for patients at the most vulnerable times in their lives. Our union provides us with a protected voice, which allows us to fight for our patients, particularly when a for-profit corporation is willing to sacrifice their safety, as Tenet has done, to boost their stock price for their shareholders. But while they have enormous financial resources, we have been so empowered to see the level of support we have received, not only in our city of Worcester, but from across the state, across the nation, and across the world. Leading local, state, and national political officials have come to our aid. So many labor and community organizations and our brothers and sister nurses from London to Los Angeles have lent their support to our cause. We are so grateful for this demonstration of solidarity in the service of worker justice and patient safety against Tenet's corporate greed. And that support continues tonight with your participation in our struggle. You understand that what is at stake is much more than one nurse's union contract with a recalcitrant employer. Our fight has taken on national significance and has implications for any number of unionized workers who need to make a stand against corporate greed at this critical time in our nation's history. In every sense, our fight is your fight, and we hope you will continue to support us, and that together we can use this struggle to raise a clarion call for social and worker justice for all communities from coast to coast. On behalf of the striking nurses of Saint Vincent Hospital, I want to say thank you and welcome to our fight.
Thank you, Marie, for now and for everything you've given to this fight over 21 years, 23 years, 24 years probably. Cole, is there a video ready at this point, a short one?
I didn't get the link for the second video. Where is it?
Let me send that to you right now, Cole.
Okay.
Give me 1 second here.
Well, while we're doing that, I just want to point out that questions and discussion will follow. I suggest that they follow the three presenters because one of them may well be answering a question you have addressed to a prior speaker. I think that's the best way to proceed. So if you could put a question in the chat. If you're on a phone, and I see several folks are, you'll just have to find an opportune moment after the three speakers have spoken to call out for attention, and we'll put you in. Amar from Mass Peace Action will be fielding questions and helping us go through that.
Yep. So Cole, I think you should have the video now.
M&A, St. V's nurses. Woo! We're here as the faith community to say that St. V's has a mission to come to the light, to come to the light. And understand that during a worldwide pandemic, they should not be putting profit over people. So we are supporting you because you are the light. You are the ones keeping our residents alive. You're keeping the hope for all of us. And we here as a faith community say, we stand with you. Thank you.
Every single nurse on this picket line who prioritized the care and safety of all patients over the profit greed of corporations whom truly have no idea of the common good value where others truly matter, and not only when they generate profits for you. Your humility and bravery in this fight against a giant is nothing short of amazing, and it is truly an honor and a privilege to stand here tonight in solidarity with you.
We are here to honor the safety of the nurses as well as the patients they serve. A high standard of care simply cannot be met if the nurses are understaffed and overworked. It just doesn't add up. Tenet Healthcare, you have not honored our nurses, and their sweat has long dried. We all know that nurses give their heart and soul, putting their lives at risk on a daily basis. We ask Tenet Healthcare to do the right thing and live up to the values that they have on their very own website. It states that they are a community built on care. We're just asking you to show care to our nurses. That's it.
Let us continue to join our hands and hearts together with the M&A nurses of Saint Vincent Hospital in putting human life first. Let us declare that today's pharaohs are no match for this power and love. To this, let us say, Amen.
A hospital named for Saint Vincent, who was a person who cared about service and the poor. Naming a for-profit hospital after Saint Vincent is like naming an arms factory after Mahatma Gandhi. Or St. Francis of Assisi building and loan. It's totally contradictory. It's not right.
We're out here because you're not being heard. And we as a community are here with you to let you know you're not alone. We care about you. And what affects you affects all of us. So no, we're not going to let them get away with this. In all the articles that I read, they never said, we can't afford it. We can't afford to give you what you're asking for. I have not seen that in one article. So that means you got the money, you just choose not to use it. That's a problem.
Thank you very much. Katie, would you please follow up and give us the context for our struggle?
Thank you so much. Those are just really moving images to follow, as well as very powerful words from Marie, who has been on the front lines. And I'm so grateful to Mass Peace Action for highlighting this and holding this webinar tonight. Marie is exactly right. This is one picket line, but it reverberates around the globe. And we're grateful for the support, and I'm also so grateful for the sacrifices by our sisters and brothers at Saint Vincent, who really are fighting for every one of us. You know, I'm going to talk about two pieces of legislation that are working their way through Congress right now that I hope will someday render the activities such as the strikes and the picket lines at healthcare facilities, impossible. The first one is, first I wanted to just comment that it was very interesting over the past weekend, the New York Times had on front page articles. The first one was on the nursing crisis, and then a piece on the healthcare industry. It's difficult to put those two words together, and it's fraudulent billing practices. I thought it was notable that the government has ordered hospitals to publish their procedure prices, how much they're charging for an MRI, a colonoscopy, and you know what? They're just not doing it. But none of this is news. A recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in July of this year shows that collection agencies last year held $140 billion in unpaid medical debt. More and more patients are enrolled in high deductible plans that leave them responsible for paying these astronomical bills. The study also reported on the demographics of the debt, which was held, and it's greater in the South and in those states that have not expanded Medicaid. And there was also greater debt in zip codes of poorer communities. The U.S. spends more on healthcare as a share of the economy, nearly twice as much as the average OECD nation, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, yet has the lowest life expectancy and highest suicide rates among the 11 nations. We also have the dubious honor of having the highest disease burden and an obesity rate that is twice the OECD average. These traits, of course, increase your risk for COVID infection and then higher mortality from this infection. In the US, per capita spending from private sources, for instance, voluntary spending on private health insurance premiums, including employer-sponsored health insurance coverage, is higher than the industrialized nations. And while we spend more than anyone else on healthcare, Americans have worse outcomes than our international peers. Lower life expectancy, which really doesn't even give the whole picture, because life expectancy is lower for people of color and Latinx Americans. One reason for discussing our abysmal health statistics is to highlight yet again that we pay the most for the worst outcomes. And there are many more examples of how poorly we fare when compared with nations that have a national system of health payment. The bill currently making its way through Congress is H.R. 1976. For many years, our bill was House 766, first introduced about 20 years ago. H.R. 1976 was introduced by Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington, and she continues to be a tireless advocate for this Medicare for All Act. This bill is more detailed and comprehensive as it has evolved over the years. And some of the important features of H.R. 1976 really go into detail about where our healthcare dollars should be directed. First, it applies to everyone. Everyone in, nobody out. We are enrolled at birth and when we establish residency in the United States. No private insurance can be sold that duplicates the benefits identified in the bill, and there can be no cost sharing. The section that covers the comprehensive benefits is an inclusive enumeration of coverage that includes all inpatient and outpatient care, but also goes on to detail prescriptions, medical devices, mental health services, lab services, reproductive care, rehab, emergency services, and transportation, very important, also therapy, hospice, and preventative care. Long-term care is included. I haven't included everything, but you can see it addresses the whole range of services required to maintain health and maybe improve our rating in infant mortality, where we number 33 out of 36 OECD nations. Interestingly, Massachusetts leads the nation with the lowest infant mortality rate, while our sisters and brothers in Mississippi have the highest. The bill calls for an annual assessment of where we stand and also lists provider compensation and requirements. There's a section that calls for consultation with groups that include labor organizations, associations representing healthcare workers, and healthcare advocates, among others. Healthcare disparities are addressed, as well as responsible budgeting. There's also language addressing a just transition for people who are working in the healthcare industry today. But I'll tell you my favorite section. My favorite section is section 302C2B, which requires mandatory minimum safe nurse-to-patient staffing ratios. Hello, Tenet. And optimal staffing levels for physicians and other healthcare practitioners. We'd actually get it in a law that patients had to be provided a safe environment. This is where investment corporations such as Tenet would not be allowed to place their patients and staff in danger as they are doing in Worcester. You can see why the healthcare industry is working feverishly to defeat this bill. I'd like to also talk about another piece of legislation that is also working its way through Congress, and this is the PRO Act. This is the act protecting the right to organize, HR 842. Passage of the PRO Act would mark the biggest expansion of collective bargaining rights in decades and begin to level the playing field. Since the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, the NLRA, business groups and anti-labor groups have been trying to weaken, gut, and chip away at this in an attempt to weaken unions and discourage workers from organizing. The PRO Act would counter these decade-long effects. The AFL reports that, quote, in more than 40% of all union organizing elections, employers are charged with breaking the law, unquote. These are some of the things the PRO Act would do. It would address the right to organize and join a union. It would clarify the right to strike is protected under the First Amendment. It would prevent employers from misclassifying workers as independent contractors or supervisors, so provisions of the NLRA would apply to them. It would prevent employers from holding captive audience meetings where anti-union consultants are brought in to dissuade workers from supporting the union. It would clarify that intermittent strikes don't lose federal protections. It would also prohibit employers from permanently replacing striking workers with non-union labor. Again, hello, Tenet. Would enhance protections around acts of solidarity. It would also allow unions and employers to agree on a fair share fee for every worker represented by the union. Right to work decreases wages for all of us. It would also facilitate first contracts by requiring mediation and arbitration to resolve disagreements. The role of deterring and punishing violations of workers' rights is also addressed in this act. It would authorize the NLRB to assess financial penalties for each violation in which a worker is wrongfully terminated or suffers serious economic harm, which happens all the time, as we know. Would require the NLRB to immediately seek an injunction to reinstate a worker who alleges employer retaliation while the case is pending. Currently, the employee faces a long period of unemployment waiting for his or her case to be heard. It would expand who could be held liable for violating workers' rights, and it would permit workers to pursue enforcement of NLR rights in the court. Currently, it can only be addressed with the NLRB. Where is this bill these days? It passed the House with bipartisan support earlier this year. However, it faces a tough fight in the Senate, with Republicans vowing to filibuster the bill. National labor organizations have said that if the filibuster is the obstacle, they will call for swift and necessary change of Senate rules. Income inequality continues to grow. Unions improve wages and benefits for all, works to address gender and racial disparities, and helps address this inequality by making sure all Americans, and not just the 1%, share in the benefits of their labor. I thank you all and look forward to seeing you on the picket line.
Thank you so much, Katie. I just want to call folks' attention to the chat. There are a number of excellent questions and ideas beginning to percolate there. Amar will field those for us after our next speaker. Also, we'll be including links to the videos. There's another one to come if we have time this evening. And also this program is being recorded. So everyone who registered for this program tonight will get a link to the recording and links to ways to become involved, more involved in the struggle, and also background information on the bills that are mentioned. So stay tuned. Brother Knowlton, Peter, my good friend, please come forward.
Thanks, Brother Eaton. I hope people can hear me. My internet connection has been a little bit dicey tonight. I've been noticing through this presentation, and I was on a Zoom call earlier, so hopefully it'll hold up as we go through this. I mostly wanted to just talk a little bit about the support that's necessary for us in the community and the rest of the labor movement and the peace movement to build with this strike in particular at Saint Vincent, Worcester by the MNA. Which is a community that I grew up in. I actually was born in Worcester Memorial many decades ago, so I'm very familiar with the community. I'm familiar with the corporate structure of the community, the difficulties that the nurses are under, and the fact that it's lasted this long ought to give people just sort of a taste of the determination that the nurses at St. Vincent's are expressing right now. It is no small measure of sacrifice to themselves and their families for people to go on a picket line for such an extended period of time. I've been through enough strikes to know that it's a huge sacrifice for workers and their families to be out on strike, and that when workers go out on strike as the absolute last resort, when they know that they don't have any tools left to them but to go out on strike, and you utilize every tool prior to going out and walking the picket line. Most trade unionists know this. Others in the community don't quite understand the sacrifice that people make, especially with their families, and especially during a pandemic, when you go out on strike, not just in healthcare, in any facility, for such an extended period of time. It really is a great sacrifice. And I think we need to understand as a community that the nurses really are not striking for just themselves. They're striking for us. And this issue of safe staffing and the strike at St. Vincent's hopefully will really elevate this issue of safe staffing. That is a community issue. This is not just an issue of the workers involved in healthcare. This is very much of a community issue about how many people do we think as a community that nurses ought to, that there ought to be in a hospital, in a healthcare facility in order to care for us, not just during a pandemic, but at any time. And we all know as trade unionists in workplace, be it in a factory or in a hospital, that an employer, especially a profit employer, profit-oriented employer, be it frankly nonprofit or profit, they're both the private sector of it. Its bottom line is dollars. Its bottom line is how much can we get away with in order to stuff our back pockets and in order to still provide a modicum of care, but still get away with it. And these are issues that are very near and dear to any trade unionist's heart, because when we're at the negotiating table, these are the kind of issues that come to the fore, which is human lives versus a corporation's bank account. Our job in the community is to build solidarity to make sure that the nurses at St. Vincent's with this strike. And then the long haul, that we as a community members join with the MNA and other workers in the healthcare industry about the broader issues that Katie outlined and that Marie talked about, the broader issues dealing with healthcare and how we are all directly impacted by it. So in short, I mean, some of the things that we all know and that those of us who involved in strike support before, we ought to continue doing those normal things, which is to communicate, publicize the struggle with our members or our constituents and elsewhere by any means necessary. And now with the advent of social media, we have all sorts of tools at our disposal to communicate the message to our community and to our constituents. We ought to bring people to the picket line. If you haven't been to the picket line in Worcester, you ought to go. Grab your family, grab friends, grab people in the organization, UMass Peace Action, I know there's been members who have gone. We ought to encourage other peace organizations to go and maybe have a day of peace organized by Peace Action and others to be able to attend the picket line. I cannot tell you how important it is for workers to see that kind of community and physical support on a picket line. It means a lot to people. It really boosts their spirits. And it also, frankly, it lets the employer know in a very physical way what the issues are and how much support they are. We ought to donate funds to the strike as much as we can. These are very expensive propositions for trade unions. And we all pay into the Strike and Defense Fund. All the members of St. Vincent's, all the members of M&A have been paying into the M&A Strike and Defense Fund. And now is the time that they need the community to be shelling out some of our earned resources to help them out in order to weather the strike. And we ought to speak, you ought to invite M&A to speak like you are tonight. But if you have small town groups in Peace Action, if you have other organizations that you relate to, invite M&A representatives to come and speak and talk about the strike. Because this is not just about the strike, this is also talking about what is the sanest and most human way to deliver healthcare services. We need to focus on the issues of the strike to the groups that we talk about around healthcare workers and nurses, and that support for healthcare workers and nurses is the key strategy for healthcare reform. There's other potential issues of solidarity and support that we can use with nurses and other issues affecting healthcare workers, dealing the role of corporate profits in healthcare, the role of private nonprofits in healthcare, and the role of public healthcare. Issues of safe staffing are directly related to corporate profits and efficiencies, which we hear about all the time in manufacturing, which is my union's background, which threaten the quality of U.S. healthcare delivery by squeezing healthcare workers who are viewed by corporate executives as units rather than caregivers. And I know that's hard for some people to imagine, but it is absolutely the truth. I actually believe nursing home operators have to be some of the most vicious people on planet to be making profits out of old people's last days of their lives. But they're vicious employers. Hospitals are no different. It's hard to believe, but it's actually the case. Healthcare ownership is an issue for our communities in the exact same way we view education. If we did not have public education in the United States, just think about what the illiteracy rate would be in the United States if your ability to learn and to be educated was dependent upon your families or your own resources for education and not just generally the public good. And I think we need to look at healthcare in the same kind of way. It's a public good. It needs to be publicized as much as possible. I look at private sector as being exclusion, less than safe practices. The public sector equals inclusion and more with safe practices. That's not the same in every case, but overall, where you're dealing with employers, and I've dealt with both public and private sector employers, the basic tenets that I just laid out basically hold to be true. We need to use the tools at our disposal to make healthcare employers more accountable to healthcare workers. Attending city council meetings, going to county commissioner meetings, attending school board meetings. If you have a local Department of Health authority, to put pressure on them to assist the nurses to settle these issues of safe staffing and to provide us with a stronger and safer community. Finally, I just want people to understand, I'm trying to figure out some symmetry and some sort of ways that we can talk about how important the safe staffing issue is. And I have actually come up with an idea that may or may not have been put out there before, but I actually think safe staffing is the healthcare equivalent to the 8-hour day. I think that's how important it is, not just to healthcare workers, but also to the community. And it requires the same level of support among workers and our community to secure it. It's not going to be just the M&A alone. We're the ones in our community who have to begin to raise some hell at publicly elected meetings and the legislative level to really support the M&A on this particular issue of safe staffing. Because we don't, it's going to be very difficult for the M&A to do it alone. They'll make modicums of progress, but we really need legislation. Healthcare for all, Medicare for all, legislative bill HR 1976 would go a long way to doing that because it does mandate negotiation and safe staffing levels. But before that, there's ways that we can do it in our communities to begin to enforce the safe staffing issue. And we all live in different towns across the state of Massachusetts. I suspect, I don't know for sure, but maybe the folks on the call, I suspect, are throughout the Commonwealth. We ought to be working with our town officials and with others on this particular issue, trying to get resolutions and other issues of support and whatever we can come up creatively to force hospitals to finally deal with this issue of providing adequate safe staffing levels for our community. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter. As I was saying, there's a growing list of very rich questions and commentary appearing in the chat. If you're not on the screen and can't use the chat, you're on a phone, please feel free to speak up and we'll get you on a stack. Amar, you're going to handle that, so I'll turn the reins over to you.
Sure, great. Thanks, Sandy, and thank you, everyone. So yeah, if people have a question, as Sandy said, they can put their question in the chat and I can read it off, or they can use their raise hand feature on Zoom and I can call on them to ask their question directly. So yeah, we have a question, and if you want, you can also specify if your question is directed to anyone in particular. So we have a question here from Padma. Padma writes that she is a supporter of the nurses' strike and is a physician in the area. Are nurses getting strike pay? Is the MNA and AFL-CIO mobilizing other healthcare workers to participate in solidarity actions? The courageous nurses can get isolated soon and may be forced to go back.
I can take that part of that question, certainly. The MNA has set up a strike fund for nurses that are meeting certain requirements that have been, set forth by the committee and the MNA. And so we are helping nurses to withstand, not having a paycheck. We have many newer, younger nurses who just came out of school, who don't have enough of a work history yet to qualify for unemployment insurance. So it is for that reason that the MNA, the board of directors, thought that it was especially important to be able to support them through this process also, and to give them the ability to be able to stay out on strike. They in general have been very engaged in this process. It was very brave when you consider that somebody may have just been off orientation and decided that they understood how important it was, even after such a short period of time at the bedside. They were able to understand and make that sacrifice, and decided to come out with their bargaining unit. So we do have a strike fund set up, particularly for people that would not qualify for unemployment insurance, or people that have a particular financial need that may be very important to cover.
Thank you. And I'll just jump in about the other union support. Yeah, the AFL, other unions have really been, the Teamsters are involved, the carpenters are involved, the electrical workers are involved. I mean, Marie, you probably see them absolutely every day, on the picket line. We also have had tremendous support from the social justice organization. Code Pink has been a regular there on the strike line. So we have enjoyed a lot of support. We have support from the Secretary of Labor in Washington, D.C., former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh. There's really been a tremendous amount of support. I think, as we were talking about in our for-profit healthcare, I can't call it a system. Some people call it a healthcare chaos. In this country, the dollar is so powerful that even with these, incredibly powerful, incredibly strong unions and social justice organization, it almost seems like Tenet understands one thing and one thing alone.
Great, thank you for those answers, and thank you, Padma, for that question. Okay, so we have a question here in the chat. It says, how do you see this affecting negotiations nationally? I'm not sure which negotiations exactly are being referred to.
I think I kind of understand this question. I think not only is this a very important fight for nurses in central Massachusetts at Saint Vincent Hospital, it is an important strike for nurses across the state, across the country. So I understand that question, and I think it is having already a positive impact. There were two healthcare workers that came with us to Dallas in July when we went to bring, the message from the 700 nurses of Saint Vincent Hospital that Tenet needed to come to the negotiation table and talk about staffing. They came from Tenet facilities in California. They were having a particularly difficult time at negotiations, and they were at the precipice of taking a strike authorization vote. Just about a week and a half ago, I received a text from one of them. Her name was Amy. And Amy told us, just stories that would make you cry about how she's a young mom that works 40 hours a week, and she can't even afford to live in the same house with her son because there's not enough room. He has to live with his grandmother. She can't even afford insurance, and she works 40 hours a week. They didn't win everything that they had on the table, but they won the key elements during their negotiations at the table with Tenet. And I certainly don't say that we're responsible for the win that they had, but I think that our struggle, our fight helped at the table. And I can see where for other nurses at the table during particularly difficult negotiations, and other nurses in the country and other healthcare workers, other workers in general will look at this, and I think that they will feel bolstered by this. I think that this will help in other industries, not only healthcare, not only for nurses, but for other workers that are united and fighting the same type of unethical, treacherous employer. So I do think that this will help negotiations, not only for nurses in the state and across the country, but for other organized workers also.
And Amar, I'd like to jump in just for a second and say that the National Union of Healthcare Workers, which is based in California, we have a long relationship with that particular union, sending some support to them when they need it. And now they're sending support to us as we need it. There are two hospitals where they represent workers that have gone on strike during this period to help put the pressure. Well, they had their own issues, but also putting pressure on Tenet. Tenet is national and in scope, and many of those facilities do have unions, and quite frankly, very many don't. So it's a weird situation, but I think folks are watching. And just like 21 years ago, this T-shirt I dug out the other day by accident is from the 2000 strike. During that strike, there were also messages of support coming in globally, and the tremendous amount of support from Rhode Island nurses, from Maine nurses, from California nurses, and so forth. So there is support out there, and we sort of set the tone, certainly in the state of Massachusetts and to a certain extent nationally, for nurse militancy 21 years ago, and to a great extent we're doing the same thing now, even if a lot has evolved since then. Nevertheless, I think we're playing a key role here. And
Great, thanks Sandy, and thanks Marie. So I see Dhruba has their hand raised, so I'm going to call on Dhruba next.
Yes, this is Dhruba from Framingham. I had been to the picket line many times, and on the website I do see how one can help the strike. But one thing would be very helpful if there's just one line added as to when people can turn up and where they can park. Like I got many emails, giving the timings and where I can park and get water bottles, etc. But in addition to that, if there's a line on the website. Thank you very much, and all in solidarity. Victory to the nurses. Thank you.
Hey, thanks,
Thank you.
Druba. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's okay, Katie. I just wanted to say that we appreciate people that come to the picket line any time of the day. You know, we're there from 6 a.m. until midnight. I will tell you, we are having an event, I believe, on August 25th, which is this coming Wednesday. It's at 7 p.m. It's a prayer vigil that is being coordinated by the Worcester Interfaith Group. I think one of the clips showed, you know, such an event that we had back in May. We've actually had, I think, 3 of them. So that, Druba, is something that you might definitely be interested in coming to. You can always park in the parking lot at the old Pub 99 where the strike office is. You're welcome to come into the strike office. We have plenty of, you know, water and coffee and snacks, and we have a restroom, a place to sit and rest and talk. We welcome you at any time, but I understand your question. We also are very appreciative when people come to the picket line on Wednesdays from 4 to 6. That's when we typically have our open bargaining unit meeting. And so it's wonderful to know that we have the line covered adequately. So those are, I hope, a couple of suggestions that you might be able to think about.
I'd like to jump in again also. I was at a meeting over the weekend, yesterday actually, with actually there's older folks and younger folks, and they wanted to figure out the best time to carpool from Boston to go to Worcester. And now I know if they can play an especially good role Wednesday between 5 and 7, Marie, I will direct them in that direction.
It's Wednesdays from 4 to 6.
4 to 6. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Katie, my former select board chair.
Great. Thank you, Druba, for that question. Okay, so next let's call on Jonathan and then David. So Jonathan.
Okay, so I just want to say, given the federal legislation that has the safe staffing, you know, our group we have affiliates all across the country, and one of the things we will do soon in the next week is call upon affiliates in other states to get in touch with the nurses union in their state and mobilize in support of Jayapal's legislation, and try to get a kind of little wave of national support. So that's a natural for us.
Yep. Thank you so much. I mean, it's such an important bill. I mean, just to get profits out of healthcare, but certainly, you know, think if we did have, you know, a national safe staffing limits, you know, then maybe nurses would never walk another picket line.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan and Katie. We have a public school system, and anyone can go to that. That's removed from our capitalist system. So I think healthcare should be as well. Okay, next up, let's call on David. David.
Hey, David Schulmeyer. I'm with the communications director for the M&A, and it's my honor and privilege to work for and with Katie Murphy and Marie Ritacco and all those nurses. The sacrifice they're making is beyond words. I was with them and with Sandy in 2000 when we did this the first time against Tenet, and I love you, Sandy. It's good to see you, my brother. This is a huge fight. Druba, I just wanted to say, you just gave me a piece of information I didn't realize. We have that wonderful page on the strike, but we don't tell people where to park. And I will add that sentence at your suggestion, because we've got the best strike office I've ever seen. It's right across the street from the picket line. It's right beside a Starbucks, so you can get a nice coffee and get energized. You can come into the strike office. We have bathrooms right there, but that's a great piece. But anything you can do. The hardest thing to do, I'm a communications guy, we've done a pretty good job, is to keep the public aware that the strike is going on the longer it's gone on. The media has been good about paying attention to it, but like anybody else, we've got Afghanistan going on and everything else. It's hard to keep their attention. So anything you can do on social media or within your own Facebook groups or whatever to alert people that the strike is going on and how they can support it. And Sandy, another good time to have people come carpool is mid-afternoon. That's a time when the nurses are, picking the kids up from camp or taking them to practice or working. a lot now to sustain themselves in the strike. A lot of nurses are working per diem. We're encouraging them to do so because we're going to have to stick this out. So, but I just want to thank everybody. Any support you can give is extremely appreciated. And I just want to comment, this is being felt across the country. It has implications for every hospital nurse, not only here, but across the world that are watching this, because everybody's feeling this. The message that's been, you know, we went from standing on balconies, banging pots and pans, while these nurses were working with inadequate PPE, not provided by the government, not provided by their employers, put in danger, to now where they're like these nurses 169 days. So the message from nurses, there was a great article in The Guardian that with the title "From Heroes to Zeros," and that's how nurses feel. The ones who suffer because of that are the patients. And so anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks,
folks.
David.
It's a little after 8. We did start a few minutes late. What do you think, Amar? Want to take one more question?
Yeah. Let's take a question from Susan.
So, who is it who has come out and said that there should be vaccines, and is it vaccines, not bombs, in terms of how much money this country spends on destruction rather than on health?
Yeah, exactly.
Question for Jonathan.
Before we close, I'd like to give a little shout out to the committee that worked on this. Sandy was in the lead, but Bonnie Gorman, Catherine Delory, Alan Maya, Louise Parker, Rosemary Keene, and Amar and Cole, Susan Mirsky, all been working away to keep these educational efforts going. So thank you. Doesn't compare to what the nurses are doing, but every bit helps.
Well, we're all fighting together, arm in arm.
Well, it's teamwork. It's absolutely teamwork.
And I can tell you that the Saint Vincent nurses are so appreciative that, you've chosen to support us, and we take that very seriously and are very honored. Thank you.
Well, we're all in this together, and the Saint Vincent nurses are up against a big corporation.
Yep.
So the only way we could even those odds in this unfair game is by coming together. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other hands raised or questions. As Sandy said, someone from our team will reach out in the next couple of days with a video recording of this webinar, the videos that Sandy and Cole shared, and also a third video that we didn't get to, but it includes really great remarks from Sarah Nelson and others. So keep an eye out from that. It'll also have advocacy links that you can click on to support and get involved. So we're going to put that email together. Keep an eye out for that. Peter, Sandy, Katie, or Marie, thank you so much for joining us. And do you have any final closing words you want to leave us with tonight?
I'd just like to say thank you again for everybody that participated. I would love to meet you in person on the line. And if you do come to the line, ask for me. It would be fun to meet and share a walk or two around the block and a cold water. It would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to just say a quick shout out to Mass Peace Action. You're working tirelessly to make this a better world. You really are. And it is so appreciated by every single one of us for all the work you do. So thank you so much.
This is Peter. I want to just thank Mass Peace Action for putting this together, and for the nurses at St. Vincent's for standing up, not just obviously for themselves and their families, but for all of us. I just can't tell people how critically important enough this is. And this is getting national resonance. This is how this stuff gets built. One struggle at a time becomes a collective movement. And this issue around safe staffing has been around for quite a while, But now that there's this massive strike going on at St. Vincent's by the nurses, it's really starting to take hold, I think, in ways that we had not envisioned it before. And mind you, this is just after that ballot initiative 2 years ago, where the corporations put millions and millions of dollars into defeating that. And the nurses clearly at St. Vincent are saying, with or without that referendum, we're going to get it at St. Vincent's. And we have to make sure that they do, because then we will all benefit from it. And it would be a terrible loss if we didn't. Thanks,
Well, I want to thank our panel, excellent panel. I want to thank Amar especially for helping out and getting this through, and certainly Jonathan for his introduction. Just to let you know, while I was on mute just now, while the others were speaking, I got a call from one of the drivers for that carpool that I was talking about. So folks knew this wasn't able to get on the program, but is itching to find out when I will give him directions to get to Worcester. So let's all get out there and
Beautiful.
move things along. Let's win this.
Let me know when you're coming, Sandy. Thank you. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I
Bye,
appreciate
folks.
it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night, everyone. Solidarity.
Forever.
Thanks, everyone.